Julian Walsh had everything under control until one moment shattered his perfectly ordered life. What he saw that day left him speechless, but the truth behind it would change everything. Stay till the end to uncover the shocking twist. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Julian Walsh moved through the grand corridors of his estate with the same mechanical precision that defined every aspect of his life. His days were meticulously scheduled. His business empire thrived under his control, and his home ran like a well-oiled machine. There was no room for surprises. That was why, as he passed by the wide glass windows overlooking the garden, what he saw made him stop in his tracks. His 12-year-old son, Leo, was dancing, but he wasn't alone. With him was Maria, the house cook, a woman he had barely given a second thought since she was hired 6 months ago. For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. The sight was so unexpected that Julian had to blink several times, convinced that his mind was playing tricks on him. Yet there they were, moving across the grass in perfect synchrony. Leo's movements were hesitant, unsteady, yet filled with an unusual concentration. He stumbled more than once, but rather than displaying frustration, he laughed, a genuine, carefree laugh that Julian hadn't heard in years. Ever since his mother's passing, Leo had become reserved, locked in his own world. And now there he was, smiling because of her. Maria moved with an elegance that Julian had never associated with a cook. Every step, every motion, was precise and deliberate, not playful improvisation, but the execution of someone who had been trained in the art of movement. She wasn't just indulging a child's whim, she was guiding him, teaching him. A cold unease spread through Julian's chest. He didn't like that someone else, especially a mere employee, held such influence over his son. The longer he watched, the more his irritation grew. He had no patience for this. With a stiff posture, he made his way outside, his footsteps sharp against the stone path. As he approached, Maria and Leo noticed him. The boy froze, his earlier joy vanishing into apprehension. Maria, however, remained composed, merely wiping her hands on her apron before straightening to meet Julian's gaze. "What is going on here?" Julian's voice was cool, controlled. Leo lowered his head, but Maria met his stare without hesitation. "We were practicing, sir," she said simply. "Practicing what exactly?" "Your son wanted to learn how to dance." Julian turned his attention to Leo. "Since when?" The boy hesitated, shuffling his feet. "For a while now," he admitted quietly. A sharp pang of guilt struck Julian's chest. He had never noticed, he had never asked. "And why didn't you tell me?" Leo lifted his shoulders in a small shrug, but before he could answer, Maria spoke. "Because he had no one to practice with." Julian narrowed his eyes at her. There was something in her tone, something firm and unwavering. It irritated him. "This isn't your job," he stated. "No, it isn't," Maria agreed. "Then why are you doing it?" She crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "Because he asked me to." Julian turned back to his son. "Is that true?" Leo nodded. A heavy silence stretched between them. Julian exhaled slowly, irritation clawing at the edges of his composure. He had no logical reason to be this bothered, yet he was. Something about this entire situation felt off, like there was a layer to it he couldn't see, and that was unacceptable. His gaze shifted back to Maria. "I need to speak with you alone." Leo looked at them both, his brows knitting together with concern. Maria, however, remained calm. "As you wish, sir." Julian turned sharply, heading back into the house without waiting for her to follow. Yet as he stepped inside, he cast a glance over his shoulder. Leo leaned toward Maria, whispering something. She responded quietly, her expression unreadable, and the boy let out a small, conspiratorial smile. A chill ran down Julian's spine. There was something more to this, something he wasn't seeing, and he was determined to uncover it. Julian sat in his office, fingers steepled beneath his chin as he stared at his computer screen. The information before him was both ordinary and unsettling. Maria Ruiz, 29 years old, hired as a cook in his estate 6 months ago. No criminal record, no troubling history, nothing that stood out. She was, by all appearances, exactly what she seemed to be, a house employee who did her job and stayed out of trouble. And yet, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something hidden beneath the surface. His instincts had never failed him before. In business, he had built an empire on knowing when something wasn't as it appeared, and now those same instincts screamed that Maria was not just a cook. He typed her name into a broader search, adding a keyword that had been nagging at the back of his mind ever since he saw her dance. Maria Ruiz, ballerina. At first, nothing came up. Then, buried beneath articles and irrelevant results, he found it. A news article. A news article from 7 years ago. Julian leaned forward, eyes scanning the headline. Young ballet prodigy disappears from the stage without explanation. His pulse quickened. He clicked the link, and as the page loaded, a photo of a much younger Maria appeared on the screen. She was dressed in a pristine white ballet costume, standing on a grand stage, arms lifted in perfect form. Her expression was serene, confident, nothing like the reserved cook who worked in his kitchen. The article spoke of a rising star in the ballet world, a dancer with an unmatched gift. She had performed in prestigious theatres, had been on the brink of an international career. Then suddenly, without any scandal or public incident, she vanished from the spotlight. No interviews, no explanations, just gone. Julian sat back in his chair, exhaling sharply. Why would someone with that kind of talent abandon their future? And how did she end up here, cooking in his house? The questions piled up, and he knew he wouldn't get answers just by staring at a screen. He needed to hear the truth from her. Standing abruptly, he strode out of his office and made his way to the kitchen. Maria was there as expected, methodically cleaning the countertops. She glanced up as he entered, her expression neutral but guarded. "Mr. Walsh," she greeted, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Is there something you need?" Julian didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone and placed it on the counter, the article about her displayed on the screen. Care to explain this? For the first time since he had met her, he saw genuine surprise flicker across her face. It was brief, but it was there. She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she looked at the screen, then back at him. "You've been searching for me?" Her voice was calm, but there was something beneath it, something careful. Julian folded his arms. "I don't like mysteries in my home." Maria exhaled slowly and placed the dish towel down. For a moment he thought she might refuse to answer. Then, after a long pause, she spoke. "I suppose I should have expected this," she said quietly. "You're not the type of man to let things go unanswered." Julian didn't respond. He only waited. She looked at the article again, her fingers brushing against the edge of the counter. "I was a dancer," she admitted, "a long time ago." "You were more than just a dancer," Julian corrected. "You were a star." A bitter smile touched her lips. A star that burned out before it could shine. Julian studied her carefully. "Why did you leave?" She hesitated. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the way she weighed whether to tell him the truth. Finally, she sighed. "Because I lost everything." Her voice was quieter now, more vulnerable than he had ever heard it before. He didn't push, just waited for her to continue. "When I was 22, dance was my entire world. It was all I knew, all I cared about," she said. "I trained endlessly, pushing myself beyond limits, because I believed I was meant for something greater." She paused, then added, "And I wasn't alone." Julian frowned. "Who?" "My fiancé," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Adrian. He was a dancer too. We had trained together since we were children. We were supposed to take on the world together. We were offered an international tour, a dream we had worked for our entire lives." Something in her tone made Julian's stomach tighten. He already knew where this was going. The day before our biggest performance, Adrian was hit by a car. She continued, her eyes unfocused, lost in the memory. He died instantly. Julian remained silent. The weight of her words settled between them, heavy and undeniable. After that, I couldn't dance, she said. I couldn't even hear music without feeling like a part of me had been ripped away. Everything I had built my life around was gone, and so I disappeared. Julian let her words sink in. He had expected something tragic, but not this. Not a grief so raw it had driven her to abandon her entire identity. "So you became a cook?" he asked, not unkindly. Maria let out a breath of amusement, though there was no real humour in it. I needed something far removed from dance, something practical, something safe. Julian exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "And now?" He met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "Now I teach your son." The words hit him harder than he expected. He knew she didn't mean it as a challenge, but it felt like one. She had walked away from dance, but for some reason she had chosen to share it with Leo. Why? What made her decide to break her own rule for his son? "You could have kept ignoring it," Julian said slowly. "Why help him?" She hesitated, but then said, "Because he reminds me of myself at his age." Julian stiffened. Maria's expression softened. "Because he doesn't smile, Mr. Walsh." The words hit like a fist to the chest. Julian clenched his jaw, but he couldn't deny the truth in them. His son had been fading ever since his mother died, retreating into himself, into books and routines. He had thought that giving Leo stability and security was enough, but Maria had seen something he had missed. "He smiles when he dances," he added, "and I think he just needed someone to listen." Julian swallowed hard, turning away slightly. He had spent years ensuring his son had everything he needed, except perhaps the one thing that mattered most. After a moment, he exhaled. "And what are you planning to do?" Maria tilted her head. "You mean, will I force him to dance like it's some kind of solution to everything?" She shook her head. "No, I just want him to feel something again. The rest is up to him." Julian sat with that for a long moment, absorbing everything. He had always prided himself on being in control, on knowing everything that happened in his house, and yet somehow he had been blind to the most important thing of all, his own son's happiness. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. "I don't like people interfering in my family." Maria didn't flinch. "And I don't like seeing children who have forgotten how to be children." A thick silence stretched between them. Julian had no response, because in the depths of his mind, he knew she was right. Leo stood in front of his father in the grand dining room, his hands clenched into small fists as he gathered the courage to speak. The chandeliers above cast a warm glow over the long table, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Julian Walsh sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he watched his son shift nervously from foot to foot. Finally, Leo took a deep breath and spoke. "I want to compete in a dance tournament." The silence that followed was suffocating. Julian placed his silverware down with deliberate slowness, his sharp gaze locking onto his son's face. "A dance tournament?" he repeated, as if testing the words. Leo nodded, standing firm. "Yes, I want to compete." Julian exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "And when did you decide this?" Leo hesitated only a second. "A while ago. I've been training with Maria, and she thinks I'm ready." Julian's eyes flickered with something unreadable at the mention of Maria. "Does she?" His tone was unreadable, but Leo didn't waver. "Yes, and I believe I am too." Julian looked at his son, truly looked at him, and saw something that hadn't been there before, a fire, a determination that went beyond mere childish excitement. But it didn't erase the concerns twisting in his chest. "You realize this isn't a game, Leo. Competitions aren't about fun. They're about discipline, pressure, and expectation." Leo straightened his back. "I know, and I'm ready for that." Julian stared at him for a long moment. Then finally he exhaled. "Fine, but if you're going to do this, you do it properly. No half measures." You commit to it fully. Leo's face lit up with a grin, one so wide and genuine that it stunned Julian for a moment. Thank you, Dad. Later that evening, Julian found Maria in the kitchen, carefully chopping vegetables with the precision of someone used to structure and discipline. She glanced up as he entered, already sensing why he was there. You knew he would ask me, Julian said, folding his arms. Maria wiped her hands on a towel before turning to face him. I suspected. You think he's ready? Maria tilted her head slightly. He has the passion, the drive. The discipline will come with time. Julian exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against the counter. If he does this, he will experience failure, rejection. He may not be able to handle that. Maria studied him for a moment before speaking. Or maybe you're the one who isn't ready to handle it. Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he said, if we do this, we do it right. That means you will train him properly. No soft encouragements. He needs to be pushed. Maria's lips curled slightly. I wasn't planning on going easy on him. The next morning, training officially began. Julian watched from the sidelines as Maria transformed from the soft-spoken cook into a strict, focused mentor. Leo moved through exercises with determination, his forehead beaded with sweat as Maria corrected his posture, his foot placements, and his rhythm again and again. You missed the beat, she ordered, her voice firm but never harsh. Leo wiped his brow and started over. Julian, watching from the doorway, couldn't help but notice how much his son had changed. Before, he had been quiet, hesitant, always following rather than leading. Now there was a stubborn edge to him, a refusal to give up even when things didn't come easily. Hours passed, and when the session ended, Leo collapsed onto the floor, panting heavily. Maria handed him a bottle of water, which he took gratefully. You did well today, she said simply. Leo grinned up at her. That means a lot coming from you. Julian remained silent, watching their interaction with an odd sense of unease. It wasn't jealousy this time, it was something deeper, something he couldn't quite place. As the tournament approached, training intensified. Leo pushed himself harder, working late into the evenings, repeating routines over and over. The once playful excitement of dancing had now turned into something else, determination. Julian, despite his initial reservations, found himself drawn to every session, watching as his son evolved. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Leo sat at the dining table, barely touching his food. Julian noticed the way his son's leg bounced beneath the table, his nerves barely contained. What's on your mind? Julian asked, his voice softer than usual. Leo hesitated before speaking. There's another dancer in the tournament. His name is Santiago Beltran. He's won 2 years in a row. Julian nodded slowly. Leo bit his lip. He messaged me, told me I don't stand a chance. Julian's fingers tightened around his glass. And what do you think? Leo hesitated, then admitted, I don't know. Julian leaned forward slightly. Listen to me, Leo. People only try to break you down when they see you as a threat. If Santiago is going out of his way to talk to you, it means he's already worried. Leo's eyes widened slightly, his posture shifting. You really think so? Julian nodded. I know so. For the first time since the conversation started, Leo smiled, a small but genuine smile. Then I guess I'll just have to prove him wrong. Julian exhaled, watching his son with something close to admiration. He wasn't the same boy who had hidden behind books and routines. He was becoming something else, something stronger. And for the first time, Julian found himself genuinely looking forward to seeing what he would become. The theatre was buzzing with energy. Dancers warmed up in the backstage area, stretching, practicing footwork, and mentally preparing for their performances. The sound of music, whispers of coaches, and the steady rhythm of nervous breathing filled the space. Leo stood among them, adjusting the straps on his dance shoes, his hands slightly trembling. Julian watched from a few feet away, his expression unreadable. He had always been the kind of man who thrived on control, but today Nothing was in his hands. His son was stepping onto that stage alone, and there was nothing he could do to influence the outcome. Maria stood beside Leo, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Breathe," she said simply. Leo exhaled slowly, nodding. "You've done the work. The only thing left to do is dance." Julian studied them from a distance. There was an ease between them that made him feel like an outsider. Maria had given Leo something he hadn't been able to, a sense of confidence rooted in passion rather than expectation. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to push away the thought. Now wasn't the time for reflection. The announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. "Next, we welcome Leo Walsh to the stage." Leo swallowed hard. He turned toward Julian, searching for something. Reassurance, approval, maybe even permission. Julian gave a single nod. "Go," he said firmly. Leo stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding. The silence of the audience pressed against him like a weight. He took his position at the center, his heartbeat loud in his ears. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if he failed? What if he forgot the steps? What if Santiago had been right? Then he saw them in the first row. His father sat watching with an intensity Leo had never seen before. There was no judgment in his expression, no expectation of perfection, just something steady, something real. Next to him, Maria gave him the smallest nod. The music began. Leo let go. His body moved before his mind could second-guess it. The first step was precise, the second even smoother. He let the rhythm take over, every movement flowing into the next. The stage became his world, the pressure melting away. He wasn't here to win, he was here to dance. The final sequence was the most difficult, a spin and leap that he had struggled with for weeks. He braced himself, pushed off the floor, and for a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Then he landed, light on his feet, steady. The music stopped. A second of silence, then the applause erupted. Leo stood there, chest rising and falling, his skin damp with sweat. He scanned the crowd, searching. His father was on his feet, clapping. Maria, too, her eyes shining with pride. The results were announced soon after, and the winner of this year's competition is Santiago Beltran. The audience cheered as Santiago stepped forward, his confident smirk never wavering. Leo swallowed hard, keeping his expression neutral. He had lost. But before he could process the disappointment, the announcer continued. "We would also like to present a special award for artistic expression, one that recognizes not just technical skill, but passion, connection, and heart. This award goes to Leo Walsh." The crowd erupted again. Leo blinked in surprise as his name echoed through the theatre. He stepped forward, accepting the medal placed around his neck. It wasn't the first-place trophy, but as he turned toward the audience, his father's expression told him everything he needed to know. Later, as he removed his dance shoes in the dressing room, Santiago approached him. "Not bad," he said, twirling his trophy in his hands. "You might actually be decent next year." Leo smiled slightly. "Next year I'm winning, Santiago." Santiago smirked. "We'll see about that." Outside the theatre, Julian and Maria waited. When Leo finally emerged, Julian placed a hand on his shoulder. "How do you feel?" Leo thought for a moment before answering. "Proud," Julian nodded. "Good." As they walked towards the car, Leo glanced down at the medal in his hands. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about proving to himself that he belonged on that stage, that he was capable. And next time he would be even better. Julian watched his son, seeing something new in him, something stronger. And for the first time in a long time, he felt it too. Not just pride, but something deeper. He had spent so many years focused on control, on perfection, that he had forgotten what truly mattered. Not the outcome, but the journey. Leo looked up at him. "Can I keep training?" Julian smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Of course, we're just getting started." Julian never expected that a single moment could change everything, but now nothing would ever be the same again. "What would you have done in his place?" Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more.